meeting. Would you please rise for the pledge to the flag?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to our Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. We meet the second Wednesday of every month. Introduce our board to you. To your far right is Mr. Joseph DiVenuto, Mr. Gary Kestenbaum, Mr. Kevin Abrams, Mr. Craig Brady. To your far left is our zoning board attorney, Mr. Robert Dickover. We have another attorney here this evening for one of our applications, Ms. Ashley Torre. Did I say that correctly? Okay, thank you. And I'm Karen Unger. Our next meeting will be, as I said, the second Wednesday of the month. It'll be January 8th. Did everybody read the minutes from November 13th? Do I have a motion to accept as written?
Motion.
Second? I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. What happened to our... Oh, there you are. You threw me off. Our recording secretary is back there also. She wasn't sitting where I thought. This is new. Okay. No new business. We have action on decisions. First one is Reineke Veit. After several pages of facts and findings, the decision is as follows. Pursuant to the foregoing, employing the criterion for an area variance and in employing the balancing test set forth in village law. Village Law 7-712B. The board hereby grants the Village Law Section 7-736 variance and Code Section 310-12A2 variance as requested upon the following conditions. Number 1. A recorded private roadway easement and maintenance agreement shall be signed by the parties using the proposed accessway driveway. This variance approval requires that the applicant join in the mutual obligations of that agreement, preferably by recording an instrument setting forth the same obligations or different obligations satisfactory to all existing parties to the agreement. The recorded instruments shall be satisfactory to the zoning board attorney. Should the applicant fail to obtain an agreement from those others to sign a recordable instrument, in such case, written specification of the attempts made to obtain such agreement must be submitted. Then he must record a declaration running with the land announcing an obligation on the part of the current owner and all future owners of the property to share in the roadway maintenance obligations of the private roadway easement and maintenance agreement. The instrument shall be satisfactory to the zoning board attorney. The applicant shall copy the zoning board on its letter transmitting the easement and agreement to the Orange County clerk for recording and shall provide the zoning board with any return correspondence reflecting either acceptance or rejection of said deed. No building permit will be issued until this condition is satisfied. Number 2, no building permit will be issued until proof of the easement and maintenance agreement recording are received by the village zoning board. Approval of this variance shall not be deemed an acceptance by the village of any road or street shown on the plan. Number 3, the accessway/driveway, which is to become a recorded easement pursuant to the terms thereof, shall not be used by any additional structures for access. It being and intended by the variance hereby granted that the accessway shall be used only by the present owners of the property now using the driveway for access and no others until such time as the easement area shall be accepted by the village as a public street. Number 4, this approval is not granted in a vacuum but is rather one of 2 independent yet interconnected discretionary approvals, the other being within the jurisdiction of the Village of Woodbury Building Department. As such, this grant of variance is conditioned upon approval of the proposed building permit by the Village of Woodbury Building Inspector. This approval by the Zoning Board of Appeals is intended to do no more than vary the specified strict limitation provisions in question. It is not intended to authorize construction of a particular building nor approve the footprint, size, volume, or style thereof. The building inspector remains possessed of all of his power and authority to review, limit, request modifications to, and ultimately approve, absolutely or conditionally, any application in reference to this project as may come before him. Number 5, this application is, as noted above, tied to a specific application for approval of a building permit pending before the Office of the Building Inspector. Therefore, this approval is conditioned upon the applicant diligently pursuing her application before that official. This grant of variance, unless extended, shall expire if a building or occupancy permit for the use is not obtained by the applicant within 180 days from the date of this decision. Number 6, this decision is subject to and conditioned upon the applicant improving the condition of the easement area to the satisfaction of the highway superintendent and building inspector to a level of improvement sufficient to allow the ingress and egress of fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and other emergency vehicles. No certificate of occupancy based upon a building permit duly issued shall be given until the easement area is improved as herein noted.
Karen, excuse me, is the
Yes.
language in number 3, it looked to be a bit challenging, the first sentence, where it says, shall not be used by any additional structures for access it being. Is it missing punctuation, or is it not properly written? It doesn't seem to make a ton of sense to me, and I just, since it's going to be filed as a legal document, want to make sure it's accurate. Which item? Number 3, it says, et cetera, hereof shall not be used by any additional structures for access it being and intended by. Is that right, Rob?
Maybe a comma after access?
Is there supposed to be a comma after right? Comma
I think that would clarify it.
as,
I'm not sure if you're asking if it's
as long as you and Rob think it's accurate, I'm fine with it. I just want, you kind of stumbled across it, and so did I when I was reading it. It didn't seem to make a ton of sense.
In other words, like, nobody else can use that road unless,
As long as it's, I wanted to make sure there were no typos there, that's all. As long as you think it's accurate, it's fine with me.
I don't think it's inaccurate. I don't
Okay.
profess to be a comma expert nor a comma policeman, so.
Then I make a motion, we grant the application.
do I have a second?
Second,
Right. We're going to take a roll call, Kevin.
Okay.
Okay, Joe, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So variance is granted with those conditions. Next action on decision is Hassan. Did I say that correctly? Okay. Decision. In employing the balancing test set forth in Village Law, Section 7-712B, letter C, the Board hereby grants the variance as requested upon the following conditions. 1, the variance hereby granted is for the purpose of authorizing construction of the addition as shown on the sketch presented to the Board only. No construction other than for such addition is authorized by this decision, and no future or different construction can occur unless a new variance is being granted. Number 2, the Board is concerned that the sketch presented may not be to scale, and therefore the applicant is to present to the Building Department a scaled sketch accurately depicting the bulk area requirements of the zoning district and the accurate location of the proposed new addition to be no closer to the side yard boundary than 20 feet. It shall be for the building inspector's determination as to the sufficiency and accuracy of the required sketch, such that the compliance of the addition with the variance hereby granted can be correctly ascertained. Let's do a roll call. Joe? How do you vote?
Aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So that is also granted with those conditions. Third action on decision is Hartman Design. After several pages of facts and findings, the decision is as follows. In employing the balancing test set forth for Village Law, Section 7-712B, letter C, the Board hereby grants the variances as requested upon the following conditions. The variances hereby granted are for the purpose of authorizing construction of the proposed new structure as shown on the sketch presented to the Board only. No construction other than for such structure is authorized by this decision, and no future or different construction can occur unless a new variance is being granted. Roll call. Joe, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Gary?
Aye.
Kevin?
Aye.
Craig?
Aye.
And I vote aye. So that variance is also granted with those conditions.
We are moving along.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good evening, sir. Okay, public hearings. We have 3 public hearings. I'm going to switch letters A and B. So B will be first and A will be second. Is the applicant for B? Dr. Sure. Yeah, I don't want to say it wrong. Jaggernath, is that correct? Did I say that correctly? Yes. Okay. This is a public hearing for an area variance to permit the installation of an in-ground pool, leaving a 10-foot setback in the rear yard and a 10-foot setback in the side yard. Whereas pursuant to Section 310-25A, a minimum of 20-foot setback is required in both the side and rear yard. Said property is located in the R1A zoning district at 5 Sterling Circle in Highland Mills and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 249, Block 1, Lot 73. There you are. Would you please approach the podium, sir? Thank you. And state your name for the record, please. Thank you.
It's on.
Are you Dr. Jaggernath?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. So what you're doing is you have a house in Brigadoon there, and you're requesting relief for a 10-foot setback when 20-foot is required for the pool that you plan to install, correct?
That's correct.
And this is an in-ground swimming pool,
That's correct.
approximately something like 15 by
Like
30 or something like that, yeah. It's in a regularly shaped yard, small lot. You already have that solid vinyl fence already
Yes.
erected. We also have 2 letters from neighbors who expressed no problem. Alan and Sharon Gutierrez and Brad Kimball, both of them in support of this application. And you attach maps, several maps, one only with the pool, but with the
Yes.
survey, and photos. Does the board have any questions? Do you have anything to say before we ask you about any questions?
No, I don't have anything because it's very difficult to get it 20 foot as required
On that piece of property, yeah.
because of the shape of the land in the back. It doesn't permit, so that's why I'm asking for the variance.
And that rear yard is basically on Castleton Drive anyway. You
Yes.
don't have a rear yard neighbor.
No, it's like 35 feet away
You're
from
right.
the edge of the road. Yeah.
Anyone on the board have a question for Dr. Jaggernath?
The only question I had on the map, is the fence called out at all on this map?
No.
Can you explain to us where the fence sits in relation to the property line?
Yeah, the fence is
Probably
2
6
feet
inches.
away from the property
2
line.
feet?
2 feet in?
Yes.
On all dimensions?
Yes. Because that's what was required when we were erecting the fence.
That's all I have.
One quick question. Size-wise, that is a quarter-acre lot, even though it's an R1A zone.
Yes, it's 0.23 to be exact. Yes.
They clustered those, I think.
They did.
That's one of the reasons why it's so irregular.
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I got nothing.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone in the public, from the public, who wishes to speak to this application? No? Do I have a motion to close public hearing?
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry, what?
Is your mic on?
Yeah, you can't hear me?
No, I can't. Okay.
Well, you're sitting right next.
I make a motion, we close the public hearing.
Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, sir. Do we do?
We don't need that.
Yes. I believe it was, yes.
Yeah, but why would we send a 239 for a development?
Because I believe she sends 239s.
I don't think we should hold off because of that.
Can we?
I don't think one should have been sent to begin with.
Requires at 2:39, you must not close the public hearing or make a decision until 30 days expires the date of the transmission to the county. A decision that's in violation of that would be subject to being voided.
Can we make a decision conditioned upon,
We've done that
No.
before.
We did that with these, two of these.
That would not be my recommendation.
I'd like to make a motion, we close the public hearing.
did the attorney just say we shouldn't close the public hearing? Or we can close the public hearing and wait?
Close the public hearing if the property is subject to the 239 referral. The application was unclear. I raised that in my memorandum. I did not have any response to whether or not it's subject to the requirements of 239. Can't tell.
But I thought we went through this whole thing at the last meeting, that we shouldn't even be sending these out to a lot of these things unless it affects a road that requires the 239. So why should the homeowner have to
Discuss
wait
that.
for something? I just don't
Maybe what we can
understand.
do is send a memorandum to the building department that if it doesn't meet the criteria, not to send it to 239? That would probably make it easier.
Ask them to, set forth in the application material criteria for 239, have the applicant answer whether or not it's going to be subject to referral. My understanding currently is the building department sends every application that you have to the county
They do.
planning department without a decision whether or not it's applicable or not. That puts you in the position that you're in tonight. Without that information, I can't make a decision, a determination whether it's subject to requirement or not. All I know is that it's been referred, and it might be. If you make a decision on a referral that's required to be referred, you make a decision to close the public hearing without that return from the county, and you have an infirm decision.
Can we go through the criteria and decide that if it meets the criteria, and if it doesn't, make it, close the public hearing then?
You could do that.
Why don't we just close the public hearing and...
No, we can't do that.
We did it we just did it, I
No,
think,
but we
last
went through the
month.
criteria. We went through the criteria.
Well, we'll
Was it
go
on
through it
cer-
at the end.
Well, no, but we can't do it at the end. We do that now. And then at the end, and if we do close the public hearing, then we can make a decision this
We're going to
evening.
do the criteria now.
No, not the 5 questions, the criteria for a 239.
I just think this stuff gets dragged on and on and on. This
Well,
is-
if we go through the criteria for a
this is not-
239,
this is
and
not
it doesn't
rocket
meet the...
science.
Okay.
Really, it's not rocket science.
Well, Kevin, they're not gonna build a pool within the next month, so.
I know.
It just,
But-
opens it up a little bit longer, and that's just the way it has to be until we get the other thing straightened out.
Do we need to do secret on this? We need a determination of type 2 action, I believe.
Yeah, it's, do we need to make a motion on that?
I'll make a motion that we declare this a type 2 secret action.
And I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So the public hearing is still open. Can we decide this? If it's still open, can we move to the next application while you're looking at that, or? Okay. Okay. So do I need to? So I can make a motion to table this for now and come back to it at the end, so we can look at this more, so we don't hold up the entire meeting?
I'll
Do I-
second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we're going to table this. We're waiting for a letter back from the county. Since the letter was sent to the county, we need to get a response. They have 30 days to respond. If they don't, then we don't need to hear from them. But we can't close the public hearing until we know whether this needs a 239. And so we're going to table it and discuss the requirements at the end. Okay, so you're welcome to stay, or you can call the building department tomorrow to see, what transpired. Okay? All right, thank you.
Just to clarify, Karen, because it was kind of all over the place here, we're going to carry this over after we discuss it, after we've done all.
Right, in other words, after we do the other applications, it's tabled until then, and then we'll make a decision as to whether we're going to close the public hearing or keep it open. That's my understanding, correct? Okay.
think we will.
Yeah. Okay, so, next application. Shops at Woodbury LLC, public hearing for area variance and/or code interpretations. Applicant proposes to construct a commercial center and hotel having a lot area of 9.65 acres. The applicant is also seeking relief from Section 310-7 regulating side yard setbacks and Section 310-12B regulating setbacks for commercial centers from state and county roads. Said property is located in the IB zoning district off of the intersection of State Route 32 and Losey Lane in Central Valley, and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 225, Block 1, lots 34.1 and 34.2. And our attorneys are switching because this is Ms. Ashley Torre, who's going to handle the Shops at Woodbury application.
Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session to obtain advice from our attorney.
On
Second.
On what?
On this application.
This application?
Yes.
All right. We have a second? All in
Yeah,
favor?
I second it.
So,
Aye.
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 I'll wait
Looks
for
like
you
we're going
guys
into
here.
executive session for a few minutes. Thank you.
Huh? Why don't we just hear the application instead of going to an executive session? It's ridiculous. I think we're ready for you. Can we share? Sure. Let me turn it right back up. I assume this is the hotel.
Thank you for your patience. Sir, would you please give your name, state your name for the record? I assume you're here for Shops at Woodbury?
Yes, my name is Steve Esposito, Esposito and Associates. We're here for Shops at Woodbury.
Oh, okay. I need a motion to end that executive session and re-enter the public hearing. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Mr. Esposito, I'm sorry.
The site is located at Losi Lane off New York State Route 32. The site has a bit of a history, and if you recall, originally there was a site plan approval and special use permit issued for a commercial center that included a 94,000 square foot retail building, which was to be Cabela's at the time, and two pad sites, 4,700 square feet each. That was all part of that original approval. During that process, that application was required to come before this board to receive 4 variances. The variances they received was lot coverage, building height, a side yard setback, and signage, because the signage exceeded what was permitted at the time. The site is in the IB zone totally, and it's also now subject to the newly adopted hotel overlay zone. If you recall, our original application for this project was a little more complicated because we were seeking some additional variances, which I'll touch on briefly. But the current application before the planning board and this board is to amend the originally approved site plan and special use permit, again, to create or to develop a commercial center, which would include retail, restaurants, and a hotel. The site back in the Cabela's days was started out to be about 13.5 acres. There was then, at the conclusion of the Cabela's approval process, the state took one taking, which is about 2.5 acres, and that was really to create what was at the time the southbound ramp, which was the key component to the original design of the 131 ramp. After that exchange of property, Cabela's pulled the plug on the job, put the parcel up on the market. Shortly after our clients, the Shops of Woodbury, purchased it, the state came knocking on the door again and asked for another 1.5 acres to construct the 200-car parking lot, which is now constructed and under operation. That's a park and ride. That was all part of the 131 improvements. But the bottom line for that is we've now reduced our site to 9.6 acres. Again, we're looking for a number of interpretations and variances. The first one, let me just say that the site's also a little complicated because it's surrounded with 360 degrees by state highway. 3/4 of that is unapproachable or inaccessible. Our main access is off of Losi Lane. We had a consultants meeting, and Gary Pathenberger, the code enforcement officer, was there as well. And he concluded and opined that our frontage is really existing Losi Lane. And that area of the site is subject to the 50-foot front yard setback. And then we determined what the other setbacks were, because this is Route 32, we've got the Route 6 flyover, we got 17 here. So we then determined that this was going to be our frontage, and that's subject to the 50-foot setback. This is going to be a side yard, rear yard, and side yard. And side yard. That's behind the gas station. One of the requests that we're asking for either interpretation or relief in the form of a variance is there's this in section 31027CB, there's a requirement of a 25-foot landscape buffer along the front yard, within the front yard. So it's probably a little easier to see on this plan, but. So here's Losi Lane. This is the area subject to the 50-foot setback. It's our opinion that we meet the 25-foot landscape buffer, but also within that strip of land, we have a sidewalk and a retaining wall and a small piece of Losi Lane. So the sidewalk is really part of our plan, which we propose and is endorsed obviously by the planning board, because that's going to give the pedestrian access from this project to the newly constructed sidewalks along the 131 ramp.
Could I interrupt for just a
Yeah.
moment? I'm not sure what you're asking on that 25-foot, 50-foot. I assume the 50-foot is you're talking about, since Losi Lane is the frontage that you've
Correct.
supposedly agreed upon, and you marked on your map, that I believe it was the 50-foot on the larger map. I'm not sure what you're asking, so could you clarify?
It's not clear. So the 50-foot, we meet the 50-foot setback. Buildings 1 and 2 have been relocated or downsized to meet the setback requirement. Our question is the sidewalk and retaining wall permitted within this 25-foot landscape buffer? So
Oh, okay.
it's not clear in the code whether these types of things are permitted in the landscape buffer.
Did you discuss this with Mr. Thomasberger?
Did I discuss
The sidewalk and the retaining wall?
No.
Is that listed on the large map, the sidewalk and retaining wall?
Well, it's shown, graphically shown.
It is shown. I don't recall seeing that, because I didn't realize that was, I wasn't clear what you were asking, so I guess I wasn't looking for the sidewalk. Yeah, yeah, I see it there, yeah. Okay. I think what I would like to see, we've got two different maps here, two different sizes. We've got one for landscaping and one for the layout with the parking and the buildings and whatever. But I need to see where the landscaping is. I mean, I could probably draw them in, but, I would like something to scale. I need a map that shows both the landscaping and the layout on the same map. Especially if we're going to be considering, where the setbacks are and how many feet and what's to be included and what's not to be included.
Got it.
So your question for that 25-foot, is that the 50-foot setback?
It's not the 50-foot setback, if you can look on the overall site plan,
Right.
we meet the setback on that. Those are buildings 1 and 2, or actually building 1 is setback. In our original application to this board, we were encroaching on that 50-foot setback, but we downsized the building and kind of reconfigured that area a little bit, so we meet the setback. The question is, can we have the sidewalk and the retaining wall within the 25-foot buffer?
Oh,
Or
okay,
not.
that's what I thought you
So-
said. Okay.
Is that something that we should get clarified from Gary, right? Because landscape buffer doesn't sound like it should have a sidewalk.
I
to
would,
me, but-
right, I would think, just at first glance, sidewalk and retaining wall don't, unless you put bushes on them.
Well, our question is, if it's not a permitted design element, then were we going to request a variance from that?
Okay.
Because there's really no other place for us to put a sidewalk. We can't do it on the other side of Losi Lane because that's where the gas station is, and it's active, and it really would be an extremely dangerous situation for the pedestrians.
Where are these people coming from? That's a very busy section. I mean, where are people walking from? Up Losi
They'd be
Lane.
walking from the hotel.
The hotel that you that's on the map.
Right. So we were required by the planning board to create a sidewalk that runs through the entire site that connects to Route 32. So if somebody's somewhere else, or if there's somebody staying at the hotel and wants to walk across the street to...
You couldn't move that sidewalk? Like behind Building 1?
Well, this whole intersection was we coordinated with the DOT in the design of that, and it's been designed and constructed to accommodate pedestrian crossings, both along Route 32 and also out of this site. So there's pedestrian signals there, handicap access, handicap
So
ramps.
basically, are you saying that part is cut in stone? That
No,
you
it's
have
not-
to have those?
It's not cut in stone, but we coordinated with the DOT for that. Only because it was we wanted to make sure that whatever they were doing and we were doing was coordinated, so when we came back 6 months later, we didn't have to,
Right, the ones that you just pointed out, though, they're not even in the 50-foot, the 25-foot buffer zone.
I'm
The
sorry.
ones- the where you showed, like, at the end of Losi Lane at 32.
Right, they're in the right of way.
Right.
Correct.
So that's really not something that we'll be considering.
No. We're
Only considering the
is this
portion,
piece-
correct?
This little section right here.
Okay, okay.
Where's the section again, Steve, please? 'Cause you-
So we're only dealing with building one?
We're only dealing with the sidewalk and retaining wall
So the-
along
That's
here.
it? The whole project?
Buffer is
No.
within the 50-foot
There's more
setback.
variance, but that's more requests for relief.
But why don't you just take a map, get rid of all this other stuff on it, and just mark the areas that they need
You should
something?
ask Mr. Esposito that.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
You got all these green and red and purple, and why can't you just take a map and just mark the areas where a variance is required?
Well, I think you have to look at the whole totality of it.
So, I mean, I don't,
Well, we could
it
have
looks
a-
like building 5 doesn't meet the setbacks.
That's correct. That's one of the ones.
Right, that's one of their
So-
we're
requests.
seeking.
But it seems like all the rest of the setbacks seem okay.
Well, there's two side yards we're requesting relief from, but, which I'll get to.
But can't you just tag those areas where you need a variance?
We could highlight those.
I don't see it.
1, 2, you identified that one yourself, right?
And then
and
also
three.
at the other end.
It's a 30-foot rear yard setback issue, question, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. Two side yard requirements. One is relief from building 5.
So can I suggest, rather than jumping to building 5, that we get clarity around building 1 and the 50-foot frontage? So the question you're asking is, essentially, if I'm understanding properly, is within the 50-foot front yard setback are design elements including a retaining wall and sidewalk permitted?
It's actually within the 25-foot landscape buffer, which is in the 50-foot setback, the front yard setback.
So number 1, 25-foot landscape.
So I think the actual code provision, it requires there to be a 25-foot landscape strip from 25 feet deep from the front property line and then running 25 feet in. So the question is whether they're allowed to have this sidewalk and retaining wall within that 25-foot landscape strip, or if they need a variance in order to do so. And Steve, just to confirm, because we had spoke earlier and I thought that you weren't requesting an interpretation anymore and that it was just going to be requesting a variance. So are you still seeking some type of interpretation?
Well, it's either or. It's our opinion after relooking at the maps after our conversation is that we can meet the 25-foot landscape buffer, but within there is the sidewalk that connects to Route 32 and a retaining wall. So there's if you look in the landscape plan,
So part of the sidewalk, that's all designed from that DOT.
right, so we need to connect to, so this is the connection that we need to make. So there's a piece of sidewalk right in along the property line, parallel to Losi Lane, that's within the 25-foot setback, or 25-foot landscape buffer.
So I presume that the sidewalk follows the hatched walkway cross path across one of those driveways?
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yep.
Thank you.
I think maybe what we should do right now is go through each one of the, because I think some are interrelated.
Well, this was, that was just one,
Right. And then look at the other requests
Let's go
for
to the
relief,
next one.
and then, because this is really like a total project, okay? So you're also requesting relief, Building 5, as Mr. Abrams brought up, the setback for Building 5.
Yes. So the part of our process in developing the shops for Woodbury, once we got the call from the DOT that they're interested in acquiring additional land for the 200-car park and ride, we met with them, spent a couple of months working on alternative plans, and so the circulation in this part of the site, of course, works with the circulation for residents and buses to get in and out of the park and ride as well. So in back of Building 5 is really a drive, so we're requesting it's a 30-foot setback. We're requesting a 10-foot relief, provide a 20-foot setback, and reason being is that adjacent to that building is the access drive and a 200-car parking lot, and the building itself is about 220 feet from the nearest road. So we don't think that, although that there isn't, any potential to impact the neighborhood or the environment for this request.
But what would the
So-
size of the building be if you brought it down to be within the line? At 7,500 square foot now, what would it be, like 68?
Yeah, we're 7,500 right now. Yeah, probably that's about 10 feet. So that's probably a good guess. 68.
Steve, I got a question. This, 30 feet or 1.5 times the height?
Yep.
That applies to Building 5 as well?
Correct.
All right, what is the height of Building 5?
So this project is speculative in nature. I mean, what these will be is these are going to be pad sites. The end user will be subject to its mini site plan for the immediate area around that building. They'll also be subject to their own architectural review, because we don't know if it's going to be a Starbucks or whatever end user it's going to be. So we know that it's going to be a single-story building, and it's either going to be it's either 30 feet or 1.5 times whichever is less. So we're assuming that they're going to have to stay within that threshold, and if they want to go higher, then they're going to have to come back to the Zoning Board of Appeals to get a variance.
So maybe
Do you
you-
have an estimate of the height of the one-story building? Just for grids and chalk?
Yeah, probably like between 25 and 30 feet. Probably
Max
less
is
28 feet.
35.
Like a McDonald's would be
Like a
different than
McDonald's, right,
Chili's
or TGI Fridays, they're probably
Right,
28
depending on whoever
feet-ish.
the chain is.
Right.
One follow-up question on Building 5. I know when this was at the planning board, they basically said that there were some places that it was really tight because of the setbacks and so forth, as far as vehicles being able to make turns. Was it this one, or was it one of the ones that was down towards the front?
It was that building, right, it was actually coming in, when you come in to make this swing. So if you're coming in, you make that right-hand turn along Building 3 and 4.
Building 3 and 4,
Right,
so
so-
it doesn't pertain to Building 5?
Right, but since then, that's been reconfigured to where, and we, as part of the application, I mean, I have it with me, but we did all truck turning radiuses to know that the fire trucks can get through there. And it's been opened up a little bit.
But Building 5 wasn't in that discussion?
No.
All right, thank you.
Steve, when you used the term speculative before, does that mean that the call-outs on this landscape plan that have specific buildings identified as restaurants, retail, et cetera, does that mean that may change?
No, they're going to be, if it's a restaurant, it's a restaurant. They're marketed for that pad site. But if you, let's say you were Mr. Corporation and you said, I'm interested in Building 5, then we'd have to evaluate, because one of the things that we did with the planning board is we went through SECRA, we identified all the various potential users. Retail has certain, trip generation, certain water uses, certain sewer uses, restaurants, which are significantly higher in intensity, were also considered as part of that seeker analysis. If it were to go from a restaurant to a, say, retail shop, it would be required to get the plan amended, site plan approval amended, but the use is much less intense.
Well, I guess the reason for asking the question was, if you're asking for a variance on a building that is going to have one specific use, then the board considers that use and decides whether a variance is,
Well, we're deciding now on the setback. Is that,
oh, that's what I'm saying.
it doesn't
is
matter
the-
if it's a, it doesn't say, it doesn't matter what.
So from
what-
your
the use
perspective,
would be.
whether or not to grant the variance has nothing to do with the use of the building?
Not according to the code. I have a concern. You're asking for relief for Building 5, and then when we move forward, also for the hotel. And the code says X amount of feet, or 1.5 times the height of the building, whichever is greater. Well, if we don't know the height of the building, let's say you said 20-something feet, you do 1.5 times of that, it's going to be more than 30 feet, so it would be more than a 10-foot variance that you would be requesting. We would need to know the height of the building, both the hotel and Building 5.
They'd have to come in for an application, whoever's going to build there.
Well, I don't feel comfortable giving a variance for something where I don't even know the height of the building, when the code says 30 feet or 1.5 times the height of the building.
Right,
And I
but-
don't know the height.
Well, Karen,
So-
that was my point about the question I asked you before. When there are so many unknowns, and then the applicant is asking for variances, which I suppose can be conditioned, as long as they're not absolute, then you could consider a variance. But if it's absolute, and to your point, you don't know the height of the building, it limits your
Very
ability to
difficult to,
determine.
right.
Right, but no, you guys are getting way ahead of yourselves. They want us to okay them to build a 7,500 square foot building. We have no idea what it is. But when they find a tenant for that pad, that tenant has to come here and meet the qualifications
They have to go to the planning board.
after they go to the planning board. So it's,
They have to come back to us.
yes.
So they're asking for the
No, they
variance
don't.
now.
Yes,
so
they do.
No, they don't. No, if we give the variance, they don't have to come back to us.
If
unless
they
they're
meet the
request-
qualifications, but if they get into a height distance, then they're gonna have to come back here.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that.
But that's how it works.
So it's up to
As
the
a-
applicant to ask for
It
what
makes a big
type of variance they're
difference.
going to want. So if the height's going to be anything,
It goes from a
That would make
30-foot
a-
setback, I believe.
Well,
to a
he said that
45-foot setback if it's 1.5.
Well, right, like if he said 25
So, I mean,
feet.
There's a big difference between granting a 10-foot variance on 30
Exactly,
foot
thank you.
versus 45
1.5
feet, just for sake of argument.
Right, if the building's 20, like you said, 25 feet, okay, 1.5 times 25 is what, 20, 10, 12,
25
25,
wouldn't
35,
qualify.
37,
It's 30 feet, and if you go beyond 30 feet, it's 1.5 times. It's not, right? That's the way the code is written, if I'm not mistaken.
no, I think,
it's a 30-foot setback or 1.5 times the building height, whichever is
right, not
greater.
30
So
feet on the
if-
height of the
Whichever's
building.
greater.
So if
Right.
1.5 times the building height results in a greater setback of that.
It's the same as the Walmart
So if the building's 30
project.
feet, it would be 45 feet setback.
Karen, it's the same as the Walmart project. First you had Wendy's, and then you had IHOP, and then you had Chili's. They rented the pads, they came in front of the town and got a permit to build it. And if it met the qualifications, they got the permit. If it didn't, it had to go to the ZBA. But they're just want approval that they're gonna allow someone to build a 7,500 square foot building there. That's all they want.
That's not how I'm looking at the variance. I'm looking at it as a setback, not a square foot
A s-
issue.
You're looking at it as a setback that they can have 7,500 square feet. If you want them to have a 6,800 square foot building, they would have to bring it within line of the setback.
Right, the code says a 30-foot setback.
Right.
Or 1.5 times the height of the building, whichever is greater. If we don't know the height of the building, how can we grant the variance?
But they're not going to be able to go past.
Yeah, but the
What they're
rest of the
allowed.
project is already built out, Kevin. You can't change things once roads have been created and so forth. It puts us into a position
What
where
we need help.
we're already given a 10-foot variance.
You guys are way
on a
off
building
on
that
this.
isn't,
I mean,
So they'd be limited in this respect, it would be a 20-foot, that would be the height they'd be limited to, because anything above 20
Right.
feet is going to be 1.5 times
Right.
20 feet, or 21 feet is going to be
So they
higher
would
than
have a
30
height
feet.
restriction.
So if the applicant, if you think you're going to want anything above 20 feet, you really should come with that request so that this board can consider that. If you think about the types of things that might go there, and if 20 feet's realistic, or if it's really likely going to be higher, because that would result in the applicant, or down the line, someone having to come back to this board, and that's what they're trying to avoid.
So essentially, what we would be able to do would be to add a condition, if we approve the setback of 20 feet instead of 30, condition that the height of the building be no more than 20 feet.
Yes, that anything, exactly, anything
We were
would-
going to grant.
we'd be able to frame something like that.
but for like Cracker Barrel, that may work.
Well, but
I'm just
that
saying.
would be our problem.
But Cracker Barrel is one of the stores that I believe is interested down there. That they're going to build a Cracker Barrel. But they're going to build it to their design. But they would have to stay within 20 feet.
They would have to limit the height to 20 feet. We could add that condition if that's what.
Right. The height would have to be conditioned,
Well,
Right.
then,
that you,
Yeah.
what are you going to do about the hotel?
well,
Well,
we'll
we
get
haven't
to that
gotten there
next.
yet.
That's a different
Okay.
story.
That's a different story.
Because we would need to know the height on that.
So we don't-
And that's not going to be 20 feet.
No, that's not going to be 20 feet.
Are we done with
All
number
right,
two
so
for now?
should we move on from building five?
Is
Building
everybody done
five,
with-
everybody have a question on building five so far? All right, do we want to go to the hotel or lot coverage?
I would stick with the
The-
buildings.
Okay, so the hotel, you are also asking relief for the
We're
setback?
asking relief for the setback.
Okay.
On that sheet that you have, the plan, the overall plan, we indicate 60 feet, because, again, we don't have an end user on that, so we're taking the worst-case scenario, which would be 60 feet. That would require a side yard setback of 90 feet.
Right,
And you
It's-
only have 50.
So, just in terms of the layout of this, one of the things that we tried to do in developing this plan is sort of create like a pockets. So like this whole area is sort of like a retail pocket, sort of a standalone building, and then this really being the piece that provides for the hotel. The hotel, at the time, we thought it was really like the anchor of the development. We want to bring people into the development to the hotel, in hopes that, while they're passing through, they're going to stop and either eat or buy something to add to the success for this commercial center. It's we're asking, it's this side yard here that we meet the 30 feet, but we don't come close to 90 feet. We could redesign it. We could move the hotel down here. That would put the parking in the back of the hotel. We really want the hotel to face the project. We think that although in order for us to implement this plan, we need to get relief from the 1.5 times the side yard. But I can tell you, and I can't speak for the village board, but I was very involved and went to most of the meetings when they were doing the overlay district. And they recognized that height is critical to really attract the type of product that you want, that's in the hotel industry now. Nobody's building 3-story hotels anymore. They're all 4- and 5-story hotels. So I think this is, I just think that this requirement in the commercial district, it's again the opinion of the applicant, that is in conflict with the recently adopted hotel overlay district.
so you're saying that it's possible that you could reposition it, and you want to keep the 60-foot height?
Well, we're using 60 feet because we don't know, that's the worst case scenario for us.
So if you repositioned it and it remained at 60 feet, would you be meeting the requirements for the setback?
We could.
Okay.
But just to, again, the uniqueness of this site, we don't have any neighbors. We're not in a neighborhood. Any decision that we make on this site is not going to have a rippling effect, we think, on any adjoiners. The nearest road to this hotel is over 300 feet away. The hotel is bordered by a 200-car parking lot and surrounded by state highway. So whether, we think that given that uniqueness of this site and the uniqueness of the location of this hotel, we think it's a reasonable request, even though it's extensive.
Steve, a quick question. Your 60 feet height of the building, that would be 5 stories?
That was,
Because it says 6, the plan. It said that on the one before this, too.
yeah, well,
6 floors.
I believe the code
Code says 5.
code says 5, so that's something that would have to be corrected. That's a
So
miss.
5 is...
5 is the max. It's either five stories or 60 feet, whichever is less. That's how the code.
You okay with that, Joe?
Yes, I am. I was just writing it down.
Okay, no. Any other questions on the hotel portion?
No, I'm good.
Did you say you had a question?
I'm thinking. Oh, Mr. Esposito, if you were to reposition that hotel,
So it's 5.
I'm sort of hearing you saying that's not a ideal scenario, right? It's not the preferred scenario. If you were to reposition it, what would you do? Would you simply move the footprint forward towards Route 32?
That's the only way, just because of the geometry of the lot, that's the only way you would get the separation, or the setback.
So in that instance, I'm presuming that you would have less parking directly in front where the canopy is?
Correct.
And more parking in the rear?
In the rear.
At the risk of I don't know what, that's not preferred, why?
Well, it's not preferred because the safety for number one. I mean, we want to, there's going to be, you want to address, access the building through the front or side entrances. We want to limit the parking in the rear because it's also these. We anticipate this also being able to be shared during the day.
Correct.
We did a part of the secret analysis. We did parking analysis, and it's mixed-use building, mixed-use development. So there's a lot of shared parking. Also helps us reduce the number of parking spaces required. So this is really, again, we had like a pocket here and a pocket here, and we just think in terms of distribution of the parking and servicing the different mixed uses, that this is the best layout. And then given the uniqueness of the site, whether we move the hotel up 100 feet or not, there's really nothing to gauge that location from.
To the rear of the hotel, so your lot line behind that is owned by, is that the state?
This is the state, yeah. So if you recall, you may have observed it during the construction. There was the mountain.
Right.
That was right here. And
So
then
this-
this darker line are federal wetlands.
Yeah, you've got federal wetlands.
Federal wetlands, yeah.
As well as New York State property, so there's likely never going to be any building
No,
behind it.
no.
Or bounded by Route 6.
Right, so this
this
was all,
extension.
this was all of the original Cabela's, so
Yep.
this is the taking. It's state-owned or federal wetlands or topographically challenged now because of the mountain. And then this is the flyover. This is owned by the state. This is owned by the state, and of course, 17.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the hotel from the board? Okay, so now we have lot coverage.
Next.
Lot coverage.
Lot coverage. 65% is allowed. You're proposing a little bit over 76%.
76%.
You calculated 11% difference, but that's not the percent increase. The percent increase is 17%. You can't just subtract the two numbers to get, that's a difference, but it's a 17% increase over the 65%.
Right.
So you gave us a chart in your little packet. And I'm not sure why you did a comparison matrix between what was approved for Cabela's or what Cabela's was going to do and what you're going to do, because it was two different acreages. You have I don't really even know what I put my numbers here, but I have some discrepancies because I didn't compare. I'm looking at what you're going to do, not what Cabela's was going to do, and how you're comparing whatever Cabela's was going to do to what you're going to do. Because right now you have less acreage than they had.
Correct.
So you can't really compare. Have you done any, besides the code that changed, you know, the new hotel overlay district, and you know, you don't need an interpretation as to whether a hotel's needed in the IB district and you know, as part of a commercial
Right.
center, et cetera. What have you done to mitigate any of these problems that you have? In other words, there's fewer requests for relief now, but
Correct.
some of them are the same. So knowing that you have less acreage, what have you done to try to mitigate that? Or did you just take the same plan and try to squeeze it in a smaller area?
No, like I said before, we downsized buildings 1 and 2
Okay.
to get those to conform. Once we established what the setbacks were in August, we reduced those buildings. We reconfigured portions of this portion of the site, the entrance coming in. This area of the site also got reconfigured as part of that exercise. We've done a traffic or parking analysis to show that we could only develop the minimal amount of parking required to, again, minimize potential impervious surface and lot coverage, of course.
Okay, so you've got like 27% of your lot is impervious. Do you see any way that you can reduce the coverage, the overall coverage? I mean, you've got buildings, you've got parking. You said something about reducing parking. You've already tried to reduce the number of.
We've
Gotten a waiver or something from.
Well, through the parking and it's a mixed use development. So
Gotcha, okay.
we could look at sharing and reducing.
Right. I don't think I have any more questions on that. Anyone that's on the board on the lot coverage?
Just as another note, we did look at doing alternative surfaces, but your code doesn't grant. We don't get credit for doing like pervious paving or those types of things in parking and roadways. What we can do is in the sidewalks, we can do pervious sidewalks. We can take credit for that. So we'd be willing to look at consider those technologies.
Steve, going to the hotel building, I mean, that is also a spec thing. You provide the pad and then somebody, I'll say Marriott, just for
Yeah,
the name, comes in and puts something there. But
Correct.
conceivably, it doesn't have to be as big. I mean, they could build a smaller hotel.
Absolutely.
Somewhere. I
We-
mean, you got 5 stories now, you used to only have 35 feet. So you've gained a lot in the air that you didn't have with the original zoning.
And I think we're at, can't remember how many keys. I was just wondering how many keys how many rooms. We also did that to knock down the number of rooms as well. I think we're at 108.
108?
Or 110. No, that's a different project. $125. So again, the end user may come in and not want to do, we picked a number that we think is is an attractive number for an end user, but it may be, they may come in with less. So, but they obviously can't go more than 125.
Does that answer your question,
Yes.
Joe? Anyone else on the board have anything to do? Any questions on any of those requests that we've had so far? I think there's a 5-foot,
And Steve, I think I had brought this up earlier
Yep.
today, but there is that other provision in the same code provision dealing with the 25-foot landscape strip. So that provision also requires a 5-foot landscaping buffer right in front of the buildings. So that's not shown on the plan. So we asked, I believe you indicated you're going to look at that and whether you're going to need any relief from that provision or if you're going to be able to show that. Exactly.
We anticipate to make that provision. So
You'll be able to-
we'll look at it, and if we need to
and
reach out to
can you
Gary,
put that
we
all
will.
on one map?
Yep.
The landscaping and
Well, I
the
think-
general overlay of the,
What we'll do is, we'll clean it up, make it a little simpler, and, we'll color code these areas. We'll look at the area, the 25-foot buffer here, clean that up a little bit, and then we'll also designate the 5-foot strips in the front of the building.
Yeah, and as long
I
as
would-
the setbacks are really clear on that landscaping plan too. And just one more thing is we are still waiting for the county GML referral.
anyone else on the board have any questions before I open it up to the public? No? Thank you, Mr. Esposito.
Thank you.
Anyone in the second row have anything to comment on this or questions? Third row? Fourth row? Yes, sir. You're in that row. And please state your name for the record when you get there. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Charlie Bazidlo. I'm counsel for Millwood Place. Millwood Place is the owner of the property across Route 1732 in the back of Woodbury Center. It is the where the existing Hampton Inn is in the back. So just so we're clear, our concern about this project, even though we're not a direct abutting owner, our only access out of our property, as well as the rest of Woodbury Center also, is at the intersection where this property empties into.
Correct.
So, our overall concern here is the potential overdevelopment of this property. And as you can see, I was a bit confused about the project coming in to the meeting tonight. I'm more confused after the discussion that's happened here tonight. So I'll make my comments rather brief tonight, but because it seems like it's still developing to a certain extent with the actual variances the applicant's requesting here. But I think the board members actually touched on one of my comments, and that basically is that it seems that a lot of the variances, as I understand them tonight, that the applicant's asking for could be avoided by a less intense development on this property, either by eliminating some of the buildings, making some of the buildings smaller, moving some of the buildings around. And it seems to me, just in the general sense, that there's just too much trying to be squeezed in on this property in one project. So I think that's something the board really needs to consider, because that is one of the, as you know, one of the main criteria this board has to address is there any other method the applicant can follow in developing their project that wouldn't require them to have these variances, or perhaps these variances to the extent that they're looking for here. The second thing, as a broad brush comment, secret determination. This board, before you make any determination or any decision on the application, you're going to have to arrive at some sort of secret determination. I heard Mr. Esposito briefly mention along the way this idea of, I think the planning board adopted something called a seeker consistency determination, whatever the terminology was, where they did compare the impacts in the previous Cabela's project to the potential impacts in this project. From my review of that, these variances, these specific variances, were not addressed in that seeker analysis. So I think it's going to be behooving on this board to take a look at that and whether you can rely upon that seeker action, if it was an action by the planning board, or whether you have to arrive at a separate determination on your own. And just the last thing I'll mention briefly is that all this may be for naught. My understanding of the chain of title to this property is that there is a deed restriction against fast food restaurants being developed on the property, and there's also a deed restriction against hotels being developed on the property. So the board, I think, needs to consider that in making your determination also. So again, those are just some brief comments tonight. As the project may get more solidified and I can understand exactly what they're asking for, I'll probably have some additional comments. All right, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in that row? Anyone in the rear of the room? We can't close the public hearing.
Public hearing to January 8th?
It's the 8th, yes. I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Right along.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Steve.
Steve, moving forwards, you'll, as was requested by several members, you'll clean those maps up and improve the clarity? Thank you.
Next on the agenda is a public hearing. Avalon, public hearing for review of a ruling by the building inspector pursuant to Section 310-49C3, whereas Village Code Section 310-7.1D5 states a hotel shall have frontage on a state or county highway or right-of-way. The building inspector has determined that the primary frontage for the proposed hotel is on a village road, Turner Road. If required, an area variance is requested to permit the construction of a 130-room, 4-story hotel on a village road. Said property is located in the Hotel Overlay District and Limited Commercial LC Zoning District at 140 Route 32 and 94 Turner Road in Central Valley, and is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 226, Block 1, Lot 5 and 6.2. I see our applicant is here. I have a question before we begin. On your statement of ownership and interest, the applicant and owners are two different entities. Could you explain the relationship?
There's two different properties at issue here, and so the applicant is the same for both. It's Avalon Building Systems, but there are two different owners for each of the two parcels that we're talking about. And so on the statement of ownership and interest, we provided, signatures from both of the owners just to cover all
So
of our
basically,
bases.
you're contemplating purchasing this property, but if you can't, in other words, nothing has been done yet, you just laid
Correct.
out all the plans? Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
the applicant is the contract vendee.
Okay, thank you. So what we have, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't give her a chance. Would you state your name for the record, please?
Christy Adana from Silverberg Atlantis on behalf of the applicant, Avalon Building Systems. Also here is Paul Oliveira, principal of the applicant, as well as John Queenan from Lankin Tully.
Okay, familiar faces, some of them. So you're looking for relief from for a frontage requirement. The building inspector has given his opinion that the proposed hotel is on Turner Road, which is a village road. And his concern is the traffic that you could not control going either direction on Turner Road for non-hotel traffic. Correct?
Well, yes.
So far. So you have the lot where you plan to build the hotel, which I think you're calling Lot 6.
Lot 6.2, yes.
And then the lot that you are proposing that you purchase, which is
Lot 5.
Lot 5, and then you would move there would be a lot line change, so you would have one contiguous piece of property, which would be 6.2 and 5 would have frontage on Route 32, and your application states that you believe that would give you the requirement that you need to have frontage on a state road.
That's
Is that correct?
This application and this proposal was actually, they came up with it about a year and a half ago, and it was presented to the village board shortly before the moratorium went into effect, and it was also presented at a planning board work session, and there was discussion with the planning board attorney's office at that time regarding this issue, and there was some back and forth, and ultimately it was decided that the attorney's office's opinion was that if the lot line adjustment and merger did happen, that it would provide the sufficient frontage under the code regardless of the existence of Turner Road. So then the applicant waited until the moratorium was over. We made an application to the planning board, and at that time we received the building inspector's interpretation regarding frontage. In the letter, I did outline our basis for believing that we do satisfy the frontage requirement, because there's case law that says that the existence of a road that bisects a parcel does not necessarily mean that that's a property dividing point when there's a unity of title and a unity of use, which is what we're proposing here, because we're going to have the bus parking as well as the access on the Lot 5 parcel.
I don't
And as
think
part
you
of
could
that.
put bus parking in the front. You might have to move that, but we're not here for that.
That was actually an issue. That was actually an issue that was raised by the building inspector and ultimately resolved because it was determined that that was not a front yard. So as long as it complies with the buffer area, it's sufficient there. So that was actually in the building inspector's initial August 21st determination, but based upon subsequent conversations with Mr. Queenan, it was determined that that's no longer an issue. So this is really the only zoning issue that we're here before this board on. But to address the chair's comment regarding direct access, what we're doing is the driveways are completely aligned, and the reality is that the code doesn't say sole access or exclusive access. So the fact that despite the signage that the applicant's going to propose, the occasional person may turn onto Turner Road doesn't change the fact that you still have direct frontage. You don't a direct access to Route 32. You don't have to turn onto Turner Road to get to Route 32. You just have to continue straight onto the Lot 5 parcel. And so it's our contention that that is sufficient under the code to satisfy the requirements.
How much frontage, if you purchase Lot 5, how much frontage is there on 32 for Lot 5?
It's zoning compliant. Do you- Our parcel would have 100 feet, which would be sufficient under the code, and the remaining Lot 5 parcel would also remain zoning compliant. So this 100 feet right here.
So you're saying that that frontage, if it was approved, is already compliant?
Correct.
What we're just determining is whether or not
So,
you can
yeah,
go
so the-
forward with this, if you make all those lot line changes, purchases of property, building the road, et cetera.
Correct. This will have to be approved by the planning board ultimately,
Right,
the actual lot line adjustment and merger. But we're here now at this relatively early stage in the application process, even though the applicant has been considering this for a long time, because if this isn't going to provide the requisite frontage, then that's a threshold issue that needs to be resolved. And I guess I'll also just make the note that because the applicant did go to the village board prior to the moratorium going into effect, the village board was aware of this proposal, and the same plan was presented when the new zoning went into effect, which did include this property in the hotel overlay zone. So the implication is that the village board had deemed it a potentially appropriate use for this property in this location. And so really the only means that we can think of that through the engineering to satisfy that frontage requirement is by incorporating this Lot 5. If we were just using 6.2, that would be a different story, but incorporating Lot 5 did seem to solve the problem.
Anyone on the board have a question for the applicant?
Does anybody besides me find this map limiting and challenging as
Limiting.
opposed to a full-size? I'm not sure why you chose to give this to us, but trying to figure out the detail on there is challenging versus a full-size map or
I apologize.
I mean, is this going to have any effect on EMS out of Woodbury Commons? Going up and down that road? I mean,
Turner Road would remain as it is today.
you're not going to have people walking back and forth, are you, on Turner Road?
I mean, I couldn't say yes or no
can't
to that,
stop
but
them.
I would.
I know you can't stop them, but
Might go to
I'm just
Donuts.
curious about a dozen fire trucks and ambulances and police and everything else, if there's going to be any sort of
Well, don't
the
they
only
have
thing that
access?
bothers me.
You're talking about, you're concerned about
'Cause that's where the
emergency
gate
vehicles? They can go on Turner
What's your
Road now.
concern? I'm not following.
I'm not either. Are you concerned about the emergency vehicles having access?
No, they'll have access to Turner Road. I just don't want pedestrians all over the place if,
You don't usually get pedestrians outside a
I'm
hotel.
just
I mean,
curious. I mean,
but they walk to their car and back. They might walk to Dunkin' Donuts.
No, I think I understand what Kevin's saying, that one of the ways to circumvent the normal entrance into Woodbury Common, whether it be by workers or others, is to go back in the area where the hotel is being considered built, and then walk through back there.
There's an emergency gate.
Oftentimes, people, I've done it
There is,
myself,
Yeah.
drop my child off
Yeah.
there, because it's the only way they can get in without being hamstrung with normal internal traffic, so.
Yeah.
There are people and there are cars back there. If you provide them with a place to park, they will park there.
But wait, I'm confused on the parking. Who's gonna park where?
I was just building on what Kevin was asking the question, whether there will be people, pedestrians. and
I'm just
traffic
curious.
in this.
So let me break this down one by one. So, your